Preview.
Good morning. Here's what you need to know. Reuters. President Trump refused to back down from his threat to rain down fire and fury on North Korea, despite his own advisors' efforts to modulate his message. "We're backed by 100% by our military," he said. "And we're backed by many other leaders. Don't worry, the photo above just shows people walking in front of a news monitor in Tokyo." Our Seoul correspondent's profile of North Korea's 33-year-old leader, Kim Jong-un, offers plenty of evidence that he is not to be underestimated. North Korea threatened to launch 4 Hwasong-12 missiles toward the island of Guam. Nancy Borowick for The New York Times. Here's how a resident of Guam, the tiny Pacific island at the center of the global war of words, answered our call-out for reaction to North Korean threats to envelope it in fireway or geopolitical playthings. "We know too well the consequences of war and have perfected our responses. So what's different for me this time?" I cried. Here's our full guide to the crisis. Doug Mills. The New York Times. President Trump sharply escalated a sudden open rift with the top Republican in Congress. He raised the possibility that Mitch McConnell, above, should perhaps relinquish his position as Senate Majority Leader if he cannot deliver on Mr. Trump's legislative priorities. Our White House correspondent covered Mr. Trump's latest comments to reporters, including his praise for Russia's curb of U.S. Embassy staffing as an opportunity for savings. Giles Sabri for The New York Times. Dalian Wanda, the Chinese conglomerate, and Xiao Jianhua, a missing billionaire, are both under official pressure from Beijing, and that may not be a coincidence. Mr. Xiao, who has ties to Wanda going back years, was spirited from Hong Kong months ago and is believed to be on the mainland. A Wanda insider said Mr. Xiao might be laying out for government regulators the complex and interlocking web of debts and shareholding ties among many companies that could pose a danger to China's financial stability. A march in support of same-sex marriage in Sydney on Sunday. Polls show that the majority of Australians support legalization. Peter Parks agents. France Press. Getty Images. Australians have 14 days to register for ballots for a mail-in vote on whether gay and lesbian couples should be allowed to marry. Many Australians deride the postal vote as a costly, irregular and unscientific gauge of the nation's readiness to embrace same-sex marriage that would not itself change any law. Really, this plebiscite is no more than a glorified opinion poll, a $122 million opinion poll, a Melbourne professor said. A genesis and in a bold step for science, researchers created gene-edited piglets cleansed of viruses that might cause disease in humans. The advance may make it possible one day to transplant livers, hearts and other organs from pigs into humans, a remarkable prospect that raises some ethical alarms. Business. Tiger Stone News for The New York Times. Boeing, the venerable U.S. aircraft maker, is the Dow's top performer this year, easily beating out second-place Apple and Netflix. Google canceled a company-wide meeting where executives planned to discuss a memo that called into question the Silicon Valley giant's diversity efforts. Apple's App Store in China is under fire. A group of developers has asked Chinese authorities to investigate whether Apple is violating local pricing and antitrust laws. A major Uber investor sued Travis Kalanick, accusing the company's founder of investor fraud. Wisconsin is beginning to come to grips with just how many tax and environmental concessions Foxconn got for its pledge to build a massive factory there. SoftBank's Vision Fund is investing $2.5 billion in Flipkart, the online retailer. It's the largest private bet on an Indian tech company. U.S. stocks were sharply lower. Here's a snapshot of global markets. In the news. In Indonesia, a 100-foot statue of a Chinese deity was covered with an enormous sheet after Muslims threatened to tear it down as an affront to Islam. The New York Times. At least 50 migrants fleeing Ethiopia and Somalia drowned after a human smuggler threw them into the Arabian Sea en route to Yemen. The New York Times. Iran barred 2 players for life from its national soccer team after they played against an Israeli team. The New York Times. The U.S. military started the long-awaited transfer of aircraft from the Atsugi Air Base in Japan, a source of decades of noise pollution complaints and lawsuits. Asahi Shimbun. I didn't improve my English, I just changed the way I took the test. Applicants for Australian residency described how they outsmarted the computerized language test. The Guardian. Fossils discovered in China are the earliest mammal forerunners that took to air, essentially flying squirrels that glided over predatory dinosaurs and probably still laid eggs. The New York Times. Smarter living tips, both new and old, for a more fulfilling life. Michael Krause for The New York Times. Recipe of the day: add fresh paprika to your spice cabinet and cook chicken paprikash as soon as possible. Here's how to better manage your stress. You're no coward if you're keeping some money out of stocks. Noteworthy: Sebastian Thibault, an Australian writer, considers the new focus on the prevalence of sexual assault in her country, and, in this opt, makes the argument that minuscule conviction rates in countries like Australia, Britain and the US, leave naming and shaming rapists one of the few options victims have for even a sliver of justice. What's your opposite job? We used the US Labor Department's detailed and at times delightfully odd records on job skills to find each job's polar opposite. Find yours, and anger rooms are all the rage. Ever want to smash your computer with a crowbar? The Wrecking Club in New York City offers stress relief through destruction. Backstory: Associated Press. It was an offhand presidential comment about Russia, leaked to the news media, that led to an uproar. 33 years ago today, President Ronald Reagan joked about attacking the Soviet Union in front of a radio microphone. During a sound check before his weekly address, the president said, "I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes." His remarks were not broadcast live but were later leaked. No one was amused. The Soviets charged that Mr. Reagan's comments were unprecedentedly hostile toward the USSR and dangerous to the cause of peace, soberly noting that nuclear destruction is not something most people think of as a fit subject for summer sport. The Times' editorial page wondered about the next subject with which he would amuse himself before a speech. Newspapers in Europe reacted with a mix of surprise, outrage and horror. Mr. Reagan later expressed regret for the comment but insisted the news media bore some responsibility for national security and shouldn't have spread it. Nevertheless, he was a little more careful before the next week's speech. He warmed up using the standard 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Palko Karish contributed, reporting, ___________. We have briefings timed for the Australian, European and American mornings. You can sign up for these and other Times newsletters here. Your morning briefing is published weekday mornings and updated online. What would you like to see here? Contact us at asiabriefing@newtimes.com.